Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today we will discuss John Milton's Paradise Lost, Book 6. Paradise Lost, Book 6, published in 1667. John Milton, 1608-1674. Book 6 of Paradise Lost is the climax of the celestial war in heaven between Satan's rebel angels and the loyal host of God. Told through Raphael's narration to Adam, it is both a dramatic account of battle and a symbolic representation of the struggle between obedience and pride. Milton uses this book to depict divine justice, the limits of created power, and the inevitability of Satan's defeat. Prelude to War, Satan's Challenge. The book begins with Satan and his forces fully committed to rebellion. After God the Father declares his Son supreme in heaven, as told in Book 5, Satan refuses to submit. Fueled by pride and ambition, he gathers 1/3 of the angels and organizes a military uprising against the divine authority. Milton characterizes Satan as a charismatic, persuasive leader able to seduce even mighty angels. Yet his power is deceptive. What drives him is not courage, but pride. The war in heaven thus reflects not a physical might, but a deeper spiritual disorder, the misuse of freedom and the distortion of divine order. God's response and the first day of battle. God does not immediately destroy Satan and his followers. Instead, he allows the rebellion to proceed, reaffirming the principle of free will. Even angels must choose obedience voluntarily. God sends forth Michael and Gabriel to lead the loyal angels and resist Satan's insurgency. The armies meet in a grand, chaotic clash. Milton's verse becomes dynamic and martial, filled with descriptions of fiery chariots, thunderous blows, and a shining armor. Although the battle resembles classical epics like Homer's Iliad, Milton elevates the action by imbuing it with spiritual stakes. This is not just a war, but a war for cosmic harmony. On the first day, neither side gains a definitive victory. The rebel angels show cunning, using fiery artillery and mechanical invention, representing a perversion of divine creativity. This foreshadows how Satan will later use intellect and technology destructively against humanity. The second day, the invention of hellish war. On the second day, Satan unveils a new form of warfare, artillery cannons invented by the fallen angels. These infernal weapons create chaos, momentarily disorienting the loyal host. Milton is drawing a parallel to gunpowder and modern warfare, expressing disdain for the violence and the dehumanization that came with the technological advances. However, the loyal angels erupt. They use their strength to hurl entire mountains at the rebels in return. The war becomes increasingly chaotic, bordering on absurdity. An intentional move by Milton to show that war among immortals is ultimately futile and grotesque. Still, despite these clashes, the war reaches a stalemate. God knows that no finite creature can ultimately defeat evil. Only infinite power can. Therefore, he declares that his son will personally end the war on the third day. The third day, the son enters the battlefield. The third day marks a turning point in the war. God sends forth his son, later incarnate as Christ, in divine glory. Unlike the angels who fight with their swords and their cannons, the son rides a fiery chariot, radiating pure divine justice. With a single majestic sweep, he breaks through the rebel ranks, scattering them in terror. His appearance is overwhelming. Light, fire, and righteousness combine in a terrifying, irresistible force. The rebels cannot withstand this divine presence, which is not merely stronger, but categorically superior. Rather than annihilate them outright, the Son drives them from heaven, forcing them to retreat. The rebel angels are cast out through the gates of heaven, plummeting down into the void of chaos and finally landing in hell. This is the fall of Satan and his followers, a pivotal moment in the epic that echoes the coming fall of man. Aftermath and reflection. Raphael concludes his account by reminding Adam of the consequences of disobedience. He contrasts the loyal angel's reward with the rebel's punishment, warning that freedom without responsibility leads to ruin. The loyal angels remain in eternal bliss, while the fallen endure eternal separation from God. This celestial war is not merely a spectacle, it serves as a mirror for human temptation and rebellion. Adam, and by extension all humanity, is meant to learn from Satan's pride, the seduction of rebellion, and the futility of resisting divine order. Now let's analyze the symbols and themes in Book 6. Free will and divine justice. God allows the war to proceed to affirm that obedience must be chosen, not forced. This underlines the moral dignity of free creatures, even in rebellion. Pride versus humility. Satan's arrogance is the driving force of the rebellion, while the Son's humility and obedience symbolize divine strength. Pride distorts reason, while humility brings restoration. War and technology. Milton critiques warfare and especially the invention of destructive machines, aligning Satan with those who use intellect for harm. The canons symbolize unnatural innovation and the abuse of divine creativity. Christological victory. The Son's intervention is a foreshadowing of the incarnation and redemption. Just as he defeats Satan in heaven, he will later defeat sin and death on earth. Chaos versus order. The war dramatizes the conflict between cosmic order and disorder. Satan's defeat is not just military, it is ontological, confirming that evil has no enduring place in creation. Now let's have a look at the critical analysis of Book 6. Celestial warfare as moral allegory. The war in heaven is not merely physical, but is symbolic of the cosmic battle between pride and humility, obedience and rebellion. Milton's anti-war commentary. By describing the use of hellish artillery, Milton critiques the rise of modern warfare and the mechanical destruction it brings, portraying it as unnatural and satanic. Divine justice and free will. God's decision to allow the rebellion and resolve it through his Son underscores the belief in rational freedom. Angels and humans are sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Role of the Son as Savior and Barrier. The Son's entrance and decisive victory highlight his preordained redemptive role, blending martial heroism with a divine mercy, foreshadowing his earthly incarnation. Satan's tragic grandeur. Milton presents Satan as a figure of loud greatness, whose ambition turns to absurdity and a self-destruction, marking his fall both a grand and a pitiable. Victory of reason and order. The triumph of the loyal angels and the Son symbolizes the enduring supremacy of divine reason over chaos. Epic structure with a theological purpose. Milton uses a classical epic warfare with a Christian theology, transforming a battle scene into a didactic spiritual allegory. Now let's analyze the main quotes from Book 6. First one. Then Satan first knew pain. This moment marks the turning point in Satan's rebellion, his first experience of divine wrath. Despite his pride and bluster, he is not invulnerable and now understands defeat and suffering. It signals that disobedience has real personal consequences, even for once glorious beings. The next quote. They fell by turns and the bitter change of fears extremes by change more fierce. Milton describes the torment the rebel angels experience as they are tossed between hope and despair during battle. This cyclical suffering reveals how the absence of divine order leads to emotional and spiritual chaos. The extremes symbolize the unstable nature of rebellion and the loss of peace. Now the next quote. Hell opened wide her fiery gulf and welcomed them. As the defeated rebel angels fall, hell is personified as eagerly receiving them. The line captures the inevitability of divine justice and the result of Satan's ambition. And it reinforces the moral logic of the universe, that is, evil leads to self-destruction. The next quote. His countenance too severe to be beheld, and full of wrath bent on his enemies. This describes the Son as he enters the battlefield, radiant with a divine fury. His face is too bright and terrifying for the rebels to endure. The image conveys that divine justice, though patient, can be suddenly and completely overwhelming. The next quote. Victory and triumph to the Son of God. After the Son drives Satan and his army from heaven, the angelic host celebrates his righteous and merciful victory. This line marks the prefiguration of Christ's later role in redeeming mankind. It elevates him as not only a redeemer, but also as a conqueror of evil. Now the next quote. So spake the Son, and into terror changed his countenance too severe to be beheld. The Son's transformation into a being of holy wrath demonstrates that divine justice is not passive. Though he is the embodiment of love, he is also the executor of judgment. Milton's portrayal unifies mercy and justice within Christ's nature. Now the next quote. Far off the flying fiend, ashamed returned. Satan is forced to flee before the Son's might, his pride utterly crushed. The use of abashed emphasizes shame and humiliation, not just defeat. Milton shows that Satan's charisma and eloquence are powerless against the divine authority. Now the next god served only to discover sites of war. The cannon and weaponry used by the rebels only reveal greater suffering and devastation. Milton critiques technological warfare, suggesting that unnatural invention in war only leads to destruction. This is a thinly veiled allusion to modern war and the misuse of intellect. The next god. And now all heaven had gone to rack with a ruin overspread. Milton imagines the potential destruction if God had not intervened through his Son. This line emphasizes the seriousness of Satan's rebellion and the fragile beauty of harmony in heaven. It underscores that divine action preserves cosmic order. The next god. By wondrous sympathy, feeling the pain and horror. Even angels, though immortal, can experience pain in the form of moral and emotional horror. Milton extends the concept of suffering beyond the physical to spiritual disturbance. This shows how the rebellion damages not just the wicked, but the entire fabric of heaven. The next god. No sooner he whose boast had scaled the heaven than he fell. This poetic irony describes Satan's swift downfall after boasting of rising above all. Milton critiques hubris, showing that those who exalt themselves will be brought low. It echoes the biblical proverb that is, pride goeth before a fall. The next god. Rebellion and disobedience on the part of heaven's high orders are inferior. Milton makes it clear that rebellion is rebellion, whether by archangels or lesser beings. The line reaffirms the universal applicability of moral law. Even the highest in the celestial hierarchy are not above accountability. The next god. With ruin upon ruin, wrought on wrought. This phrase captures the total collapse of Satan's army, echoing classical epic battle scenes. The repetition intensifies the sense of disarray and a divine fury. Milton blends poetic rhythm with a theology and an apocalypse, creating an image of absolute defeat. The next god. For never but once more was either like to meet so great a foe. This god foreshadows the future encounter between Christ and Satan in the redemptive drama of human history. The only time these two forces will meet again is at the cross or at the last judgment. Milton interweaves epic prophecy with a Christian doctrine. The next god. By merit more than birthright, Son of God. Here, the Son is praised not merely for being God's offspring, but for earning his glory through action. This reflects Milton's Protestant value of merit and moral excellence over inherited privilege. It positions the Son as the ideal servant leader,